Mark Few skirted responsibility for a coaching decision that put Gonzaga in a tough spot on Saturday in their worst loss of the season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Well, folks, Joe Few started on senior night, played 2 minutes and 10 seconds. The Zags went down 9-0, never took the lead in a devastating home loss to the St. Mary's Gales, who were able to celebrate a WCC championship, back-to-back regular season champions for the first time for a non-Gonzaga team in the WCC since 1991. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about Coach Few's decision to start Joe and to play him through a stoppage in time. We're going to talk about what he said after the game. We're going to have a whole conversation about that specific decision, some other coaching stuff. Second segment, we'll go through the keys to victory, what Gonzaga did well, what they did not do well, and obviously an extraordinarily frustrating loss for the Zags. And then we'll close out the show with kind of a roadmap of what's next. Two incredibly important games that got a lot more important with Gonzaga's loss on Saturday. They're playing Santa Clara on Tuesday. They're playing San Francisco on Saturday. We're going to talk about those games. Gonzaga's resume, currently some potential WCC seeding and NCAA tournament seeding scenarios. We'll get to all of that to close out the show. I know a lot of you submitted mailbag questions. I read through the ones that were submitted, and frankly, I think we're going to answer pretty much all of them on the show. If you had a question that you didn't feel like it got answered today or tomorrow, let me know. We'll maybe try to do mailbag a little later in the week, but with the Santa Clara game being on Tuesday and with plenty to talk about in this game without using mailbag, it may end up getting skipped. But again, if you have something specific you want addressed, you don't hear it here, you don't hear it tomorrow, let me know. We'll see about getting it later in the week. Let's start with this. Let's start with the start of this game. This easy place to start this game. The senior night starting five for Gonzaga: Joe Few, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Ben Gregg, Michael Ajayi. A lot of interest in this starting lineup. Obviously, Joe is a senior. Gonzaga has started walk-ons, senior walk-ons in the past. It's not. This isn't something that was only attributed to Joe. I believe Matthew Lang started his senior year. There have been other walk-ons who have started in senior night, even against decent teams. But there are a couple things here. Number one, Khalif Battle is also a senior. Khalif Battle has been in college since 2018. That's not a joke. That is an actual fact. Khalif Battle is a sixth-year senior. He does not have eligibility after this year. He is going to be gone. And Joe's been in the program longer than Khalif, but you had another senior who has started most of his games this year who could have started in Joe's place. You also could have, Graham, I'm not going to read into the fact that Graham didn't start this game. Michael technically could come back. We've talked about this a handful of times, but because of the junior college rules changing, Michael Ajayi does have an additional eligibility per my understanding of the rules. I don't know if he's planning to use it. I don't know if him starting and Graham not starting means anything about who Gonzaga thinks might come back next year. I truly don't. I wouldn't look into that at all. Mark Few said, this is his direct quote after the game: the seniors voted on that. That didn't have anything to do with the game. We fought back into it, and much like at their place, it just came down to making plays down the stretch. Okay, so the seniors voted on the starting lineup. I'm also intrigued by that. Did the seniors vote for Khalif Battle to not start? What did Khalif think about that? Again, I don't know that there's anything going on with that. That's not what I'm trying to imply or state or anything like that. But it's odd, right? It's odd. It's odd. And here's the deal. Here's the thing. This didn't go well. Joe Few playing 2 minutes and 10 seconds went very badly for Gonzaga. I would have had this same stance prior to this game, or regardless of the results. And the stance is this: I am not opposed to Joe Few starting this game. I'm not. I think it's a defensible decision. I don't think it's a great decision, but I think it is a defensible decision. What in my mind was indefensible was keeping him on the floor through the first stoppage of play in this game. I do not understand. It was a symbolic start. I know that. Mark Few knows that. Joe Few knows that. The rest of the team knows that. St. Mary's knows that. Everybody in the arena, everybody watching on TV, everybody knew that it was a symbolic start. What is the difference between him playing 1 minute and 1 second or 2 minutes and 10 seconds? What is the difference? Because the difference on the court was 7 points. The difference on the court was 7 points. Do you want to know what the final score of this basketball game? 74-67. 7-point loss for Gonzaga. At the 18-minute and 59-second mark, Ben Gregg committed a foul on, I believe, Paulus Morauskas or Mitchell Sachs. It doesn't really matter. 1 minute and 1 second into this game. Gonzaga was down 2-0 already. Ben Gregg committed a foul. At that point, you make a change. There was no legitimate reason to keep Joe in this basketball game longer than that first minute. There wasn't. I'm fine with him starting that first minute. If Gonzaga had still lost this basketball game, which frankly they probably would have, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. I really don't. We might address it. We might mention it. Hey, Joe started and Zags went down 2-0, but then he got yanked out of the game. Graham came back in and it was fine. That's probably the conversation we would have had. It would have been that long. But instead, Joe stayed in for another minute and 9 seconds. And here's what happened. Joe was a complete non-factor on offense. He didn't do anything. He was in the corner. He kind of played that Emmanuel Innocente role, except that Gonzaga can get the ball to Innocente and know that he's going to make plays. He's going to be a ball mover. He's going to do stuff like that. Gonzaga basically played 4-on-5 on offense on those first couple of possessions. They got decent looks. Ben Gregg missed a 3 that was a pretty good look, but they were playing 4-on-5. And defensively, St. Mary's was going at Joe. They scored on him. They got him in switches. Mitchell Saxon scored an and one bucket. That was when Joe finally came out of the game. The score was 8-0 officially when Joe went to the bench, but Saxon was at the free throw line, and he made that free throw. So in effect, because Joe was the one who committed that foul, it was a 9-0 start for St. Mary's in a game Gonzaga lost by 7. I want to make one other thing very clear. This is not Joe Few's fault. It's not. It's not Joe Few's fault. I think that is a consensus belief. I don't think I'm saying anything that too many people out there are listening are disagreeing with. It's not Joe Few's fault. He tried. He played hard on the floor. He always has. He always has. He was communicating. He was navigating the screens as best he could. He's just not physically good enough to be a Division I basketball player. He's not good enough. And I hate that we're saying that, but Mark Few put him in a position where now this is the conversation we have to have. This is a Mark Few issue. Seniors voted on it. Sure, that's fine. He still could have. The seniors didn't vote that he had to play exactly 2 minutes. Like they didn't. That wasn't part of the conversation. The coaching staff made a decision to leave him in the game when they didn't have to, and it cost him seven more points for St. Mary's. And Mark Few saying after the game that that's not the issue. That didn't have anything to do with the game. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Gonzaga never led this game. They never had a chance to lead this game because they were down double figures before Graham Ike even came in the basketball game. Being down 11-0 before your best player plays is malpractice. It is a blatantly bad coaching decision. There is not any other way to look at this. It is poor coaching. It is not something we say very much on this show. Some people think we should say it more. We're saying it now. This is bad coaching. I do not know how you can justify not playing your best player, the guy who had 24 points against this team last time out, the guy who put Mitchell Saxon in foul trouble, the guy who had opportunities to win you the basketball game in Moraga. You don't play him till you're down 11 points. It is inexcusable. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that this is, and for Mark Few to say it didn't have any, we fought back into it. We shouldn't have had to do that. That shouldn't have been the situation Gonzaga found themselves in, was having to dig themselves out of a hole 2 minutes into this basketball game because they chose to play 4-on-5 effectively. So frustrating. Yeah, the 7-point swing late in the second half was a huge problem. Yeah, Gonzaga's players laying down and dying on the floor when they could have tried to come back into this game was an extremely frustrating problem. But they shouldn't have been in that position. They shouldn't have had to claw out of a hole right at the start of this basketball game. They could have started Khalif Battle. Would have still been an all-senior starting 5. They could have just taken Joe out a minute into this game. Who knows what the result would have been? I don't know that it would have been dramatically different. They might have still lost by about 7. Might have been exactly the same. This isn't a conversation we're having if that happens. This team being unable to fight at the end of games is also a coaching issue. One we might get into a little bit more detail later, but it's been incredibly frustrating to watch the team struggle at the end of contests. in this game in particular. They got this thing to within 1. They tied it. And then 7 points in a 35-second span for St. Mary's, a 4-point play by Mikey Lewis. Kid hit a great shot. Graham overcommitted on the defense. It happens. He's not used to closing out on shooters, but he hit a great shot. Marcelonis hits a 3, 10, 15 seconds later. You're 1 point, I think you were down 1, and now you're down 8. Devastating. Gonzaga, they tried to fight, but they didn't know whether to foul at the end of the game. They kind of just gave up in the last minute of this game. They just let it happen. It was hard to watch. It's hard to watch this team fail continually again and again and again and again in late game situations. How are we not making adjustments here? How have we not figured out how to do this? How are the emotions so high for the players on this team that Mark Few is literally fining players for getting technical fouls? I don't remember him ever having to do that or even having to address technical fouls in press conferences, but he does. He has to talk about it because the players on this team are too hot-headed and too emotional, and they get into bickering competitions with other players. They get into long conversations with officials. They get technical fouls. There was a really telling moment in this game in the second half, and shout out to Sean Farnham and Dave Fleming for pointing it out, and it was caught clear as day on the camera, of Graham continually talking to refs about a call. I don't even know what the call, it didn't seem that, I think he was arguing it shouldn't have been a shooting foul. It wasn't even something that important. And Ryan Nembhard had to come into the free throw line and start screaming at Graham to settle down. I've never seen Ryan doing that. He's yelling at him to shut up because he didn't want him to get a technical foul. How are we dealing with this in late February? How are we dealing with this player who's already been benched for his attitude, who's already been fined for his attitude? Why doesn't Coach Few have this under control? Like, that is so, I'm just baffled. I can't understand why we've seen this team make corrections throughout the year. We've seen them make strong coaching changes and adjustments and things that have worked out for the better. We have seen a lot of the trends that we saw last year happen, but this team just can't mentally get out of their own way. And Mark Few doesn't do them any favors when he starts his son for 2 minutes and puts them in an 11-0 hole or 9-0 hole. Brutal stuff. We're going to continue to talk about this game. We're going to talk about the actual game, the 38 minutes after Joe Few was put back on the bench. The Zags gave up 15 offensive rebounds. They failed to knock down outside shots. We're going to talk about what happened, what didn't happen, and what it means for Gonzaga going forward. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, March basketball is almost here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 players' stat projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps every game exciting. Prize Picks even offers weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even more value. Folks, Chet Holmgren set 23.5 points plus rebounds against Minnesota. I would not be surprised to see something like 16 and 8. That's a little bit over hit for him in this game. If you like that, if you like any of the other more or less projections they have on Prize Picks, just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're going to get through these keys, things we saw in this game, things that we were hoping to see in this game that we talked about on Friday's show before the contest, and we'll kind of talk about what went wrong, what things Gonzaga did well in this game, some adjustments from last time out, and then we'll close out the show kind of talking about what's next for Gonzaga with 2 more big-time contests in the WCC regular season coming up this week. Key number 1 for the Zags in this game was aggressive perimeter defense. And as you recall, for those of you who talked about or who listened to Friday's episode, I had this in all caps: aggressive perimeter defense. We saw flashes. Of Gonzaga playing good defense. It wasn't consistent enough. And ultimately, 2 players really killed Gonzaga from the perimeter in this game. One, really, if we're being honest. Gales were 8 of 19 from 3 in this game. That's 42%. On the surface, bad. Anytime you let another team shoot 42% from 3, that is a really big red flag. Mikey Lewis was 5 of 7. The kid is absolutely out for blood against the Gonzaga Bulldogs. St. Mary's has found these freshmen or these young players who come in and immediately establish themselves as villains for Gonzaga in this rivalry. Gonzaga hasn't really had anybody do that. Graham Ike has played very well against St. Mary's. It's kind of about it. They haven't really established any dudes on their side who are going out and getting it against St. Mary's. They don't have those guys. Mikey Lewis, that guy. Aiden Mahaney was that guy prior to his departure to UConn. Mikey Lewis, 5 of 7, most of them in the second half, just hit really clutch shots. Luke Barrett was 2 of 3 from 3, a guy who hadn't made a 3 in like a long time. He missed his last 10 3-pointers coming into the game, something like that. Kid hit shots. Fifth-year senior, been in this rivalry a long time. When they needed him to step up, he hit shots. The rest of the team that was not named Mikey Lewis or Luke Barrett shot 1 of 9 from 3. Marcelonis didn't have a good shooting night. Jordan Ross didn't have a good shooting night. Paulus Morauskas didn't have a good shooting night. Gonzaga locked down on most of the players they needed to. But Mikey Lewis stepped up and drilled his shots, and it was really, really brutal for Gonzaga. I thought they did some decent stuff defensively. I thought they did a little bit better about not giving up too many open looks from 3, from stopping dribble penetration better than they've done in the past. But they gave up too many good looks around the rim. The perimeter defense was decent outside of Mikey Lewis getting hot, but the defense around the rim, Saxon got whatever he wanted. He had like 11 points in the first 10 minutes of this game, something like that. Harry Wessel's got a lot of good shots around the rim. Gonzaga's low post defense continues to be an area of concern for them. And switching to the zone, the key number 2 was to be adaptable on defense, which meant more press, more zone, kind of flexing in and out of those two things. And we did see Gonzaga do that. They weren't very effective in a lot of ways. The zone didn't work in one huge way, which we'll get to that. Key number 3, crashing the glass. Oof, bad problems for Gonzaga in that area. But for the defense, we saw them do the press more often, not just on made free throws. We saw it more in this game, a lot in the second half. We saw them generate turnovers that way. St. Mary's had 11 turnovers. That's fairly high for them. Khalif Battle had 4 steals. Key one late in the game that he then dribbled the ball off his foot, which was really unfortunate. But they made some plays defensively when they needed to. The zone worked in terms of keeping St. Mary's players in front of them and making them make tough shots for the most part. The problem is that when they got the ball down low, when Saxon had opportunities to go, especially if he got switches, he was able to score. Morauskas was able to score low on the block. Wessels was able to score on the block. And that didn't matter whether Gonzaga was in a zone or a man. They were just giving up too many points. Braden Huff had 4 fouls in like 9 minutes of action. Ben Gregg played decently in this game, but had an early foul, which I think hurt him, and just is not big enough to defend those guys super capably. Graham did fine, but they still scored over him more easily than you need to be better on that end of the floor, and they weren't better in that area, especially when they were not able to slow down Marcelonis as well as they were able to slow down like Marcus Williams at San Francisco or Nate Calmise at Washington State. We talked about Gonzaga's ability to neutralize those playmakers for those teams was critical in them winning those games. Goose didn't have a great game. He only had 9 points. That's below his season average, but he did have 6 assists. He had 3 turnovers, a little high for him, but 9 points, 6 assists, 3 turnovers. Not terrible, not great, but not good enough for Gonzaga. He was still able to make things happen for this team against their defense. You have to really make this team do poorly offensively. They did fine offensively. It clearly was enough for them to win wire to wire against Gonzaga in this one. And the big part of it, huge part of it, the most important key in this game, unquestionably in my mind, rebounding. Gonzaga got gashed on the glass. 38-26. Gonzaga out-rebounded by 12. That doesn't happen often. It does not happen often to Mark Few-led teams. The Gales had 15 offensive rebounds. 15 offensive rebounds. Series actually only had 21 second chance points. Gonzaga, who only had 7 offensive rebounds, actually had 14 second chance points. So the margin in terms of second chance points was not that high, although you'll notice it is the magic number, 7. That's how many points Gonzaga lost this basketball game by. Second chance points, critical. 15 offensive rebounds. Even if St. Mary's didn't convert them into points at the rate that you would have expected them to, that is devastating for Gonzaga. It forces them to work much harder defensively. Again, I think Farnham said this during the game, that when they get offensive rebounds, they're not often just quick putbacks and then just, for it doesn't impact the defense. They get the offensive rebound, or it's that tip back, which they do so well, and then they reset the offense. So for you defensively, you got to now play good, solid, aggressive, difficult defense for another 27, 28 seconds. That's really hard. And even if St. Mary's doesn't score, that wears you out. It makes it harder to get back into your offensive sets. It fatigues players faster. They're more likely to commit fouls. Like, it has this huge negative impact on the Zags when these things happen. And getting out rebounded by 12, giving St. Mary's 15 offensive rebound opportunities. Again, the zone was a huge part of this. The amount of times that St. Mary's just had a guy wide, nobody around him under the basket when a ball came off the rim. I mean, it just happened so many times. And I alluded to the fact that it's hard to rebound out of zone. That doesn't mean that Gonzaga, it's not inexcusable, or it's not excusable that they weren't able to do it. They needed to be prepared that that was going to be a difficult part of this game, and they weren't. And that's a huge problem. And it ended up costing them dearly in this basketball game. Key number 4 was to make sure that Khalif Battle brought his A game. I almost don't know how to evaluate Khalif Battle's game, because it wasn't bad, but it wasn't very good. It just was a quiet game. He was just kind of quiet in this game, and I think we needed him to be a little louder. Battle finished the game. He played 28 minutes. He had 8 points. He had 4 steals. He had 2 boards and an assist. He had a block. He had a pair of turnovers, and he had a foul. He was 4 of 5 on 2-point attempts. That's very good. 4 of 5 on the 2-pointers. He had some jumpers. He got to the rim a couple of times. 0 of 2 from 3. Neither of his 3-point attempts were particularly. One of them was decently contested, but it was not a bad shot. It was a play designed for him to get a look. He caught the ball. He went up with it. He just didn't make it. The other one was fine. They weren't 2 3-point attempts from Khalif Battle in the game is not a concern to me. Wish he'd have made one of them, but that's not an issue. But he didn't get any free throw attempts. Again, 4 of 5 on 2-pointers. So when he got his 2-point looks, he typically scored. I guess that's good. But you'd like him to be putting more pressure and bending the defense in ways that he didn't really do in this game. And again, it was just quiet. It was just quiet. I mean, this line, 8 points, 4 steals, 4 of 7 shooting in 18 minutes, I'd be like, okay, I guess that's fine. But he played 28 minutes, and it felt like a lot of the time he wasn't super impactful in a game where I think he could have really been more of a difference maker. I can't say he played bad, because he didn't really, but he didn't do as much in this game as I think he's capable of. Key number 5 for Gonzaga was shot selection. Let's talk about the 3-point shooting. 4 of 14 for the Zags in this game, 28.5% for the game. I said before the game that I didn't want to see Gonzaga get too reliant on shooting the 3-point shot. I said between 15 and 20 3-point attempts feels like a reasonable spot. They were even under that. They did not get too reliant on the 3-point shot. The spread in terms of players taking the threes was fine with me. Hickman took 7 of the 14 3-point attempts. Nembhard took 2. Khalif Battle and Ben Gregg each took 2. Braden Huff took 1. That is fine. That's fine with me. I think that that's a fairly decent spread in a game where you're only going to take 14 threes, to have your far and away best 3-point shooter take half of them, to have Nembhard and Battle each take 2. Those are your 2 other, solid perimeter 3-point shooters. Ben Gregg taking 2. He hasn't been great at them this year, but that's fine. Braden Huff 1, knocked his down. Good for him. But none from Ike, none from Ajayi. I thought that was fine. The problem is they just didn't make enough of them. Nembhard went 1 of 2. Huff went 1 of 1. Hickman 2 of 7. Really frustrating time for Nolan Hickman to have a bad 3-point shooting game. Needed him in this one. He had a decent offensive game outside of that. He scored around the rim a few times. He had some decent plays, but when they needed his 3-point shooting, it was there earlier in the week. It wasn't there in this game. And that's hugely problematic for Gonzaga. They were 23 of 42 on 2-pointers, about 55%. Not great, but against a good defensive team, that's fine. 9 of 12 from the free throw line, fine. The shot selection wasn't a huge issue for Gonzaga in this game. It was not getting enough rebounds. It was not getting yourself many second chance opportunities. It was defensive issues and crashing the defensive glass were the big issues, and then not having any clutch plays whatsoever. Just kind of laying down when St. Mary's went on that quick 7-0 35-second run, and just kind of having the wind knocked out of your sails and not being able to come back. That was the main issue in this game. And unfortunately, it's an issue that's been prevalent all season long, and now puts Gonzaga in a position where they got 2 more good games left this week, 2 quad 1 opportunities. They need them. They need them bad. They need them more than they've ever needed quad 1 wins to finish out a season. And we said that last year, and this year it is even more pressure to win these games. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or you just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay right in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It's great because when you win, folks, you get paid instantly. Big Monday coming up. Houston favored by 1.5 points on the road against Texas Tech. I like that one. I like Houston the way they've been playing. I think they get a little vengeance on Texas Tech. If you want to join me right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show looking ahead. Looking at the 2 games this week that Gonzaga has against Santa Clara and San Francisco, looking at the importance of those games, the net rankings for those teams, what it means for Gonzaga. We'll talk some WCC scenarios. If they win both, if they split, if they lose both, what it looks like from a seeding perspective getting into the WCC tournament, what it might look like from the NCAA tournament as well. We'll talk a little bit about Gonzaga's net data, and then we'll get out and on with your day, hopefully in a little bit better mood than you were when you started the show about the Zags. But there's only so much I can do at this point. Let's put it that way. The Zags got 2 games, Tuesday, 8 p.m. at Santa Clara, Saturday, 8 p.m. at San Francisco, both of those Pacific time. The San Francisco game will not be on USF's campus. It'll be at the Chase Center. That does count as a true road game for Gonzaga in the terms of the net ranking, which is important as San Francisco is currently 60th in the net. So if that game were to happen on USF's campus, or if that game were to happen on Chase Center and be considered a neutral site game, then this would be a quad 2 game for Gonzaga. But because it is considered a home game for San Francisco and a true road game for Gonzaga, it ends up being quad 1. This is why, even though there is some frustration that Baylor is right now, as I'm recording this, exactly 30th in the net. If they were to fall 1 spot, Gonzaga's quad 1 win over Baylor would drop to quad 2. That would be frustrating, as Gonzaga did not play Baylor at their true home floor, but they played them in Spokane. However, the karma kind of comes back to Gonzaga with having 2 road games against San Francisco, both being played in environments that are a little bit less hostile to Gonzaga. But we'll get more into the USF game later in the week. Let's start with Santa Clara. This game's coming up on Tuesday. Currently, as I'm recording this Sunday afternoon, Santa Clara is 53rd in the net, 2-4 in quad 1 games, 4-3 quad 2. The big kicker for them, 5-3 in quad 3 games. But they just beat Washington State on Saturday in Pullman, and I mean just crushed them. 109 points for this Santa Clara team. They made 23 threes, 23 three-pointers. They shot 60.5% from 3. I think they made 17 in the first half, something like that. Just obscene levels of shooting from this Santa Clara team. It's a little scary because we've seen them do this. We saw Tyree Bryan go off for 35. We saw them make 7 straight threes in the second half last time these 2 teams played, and that was in Spokane. Now Gonzaga's got to play them at their house where they beat us last year. This is a scary game. There's no other way to look at it. Gonzaga had taken care of business against St. Mary's. This game would still be a little scary, but we'd feel more comfortable. Now, this becomes a much more important borderline must-win game. And it's in a tough environment, playing a red-hot team who fully had Gonzaga's number last year. One of the talking points I was going to bring into this game, the game preview, which will be Tuesday's episode, was how successful Gonzaga has been at playing teams for a second time this season. For the majority of their contests, whether it was a team they already beat by a good amount or a team they lost to the first time, they have played them better the second time around. In many cases, significantly better. Oregon State's a great example of that. Even though they beat Wazoo last time, they still played them much better this second time around. Pepperdine, obviously not a good team, but still demolished them the second time around. St. Mary's is the counterexample, of course, and a fairly significant counterexample, as the game flow was fairly similar. Get down to a 10-ish point deficit at halftime, bring the deficit to 0 in the second half, and still ultimately lose. But obviously, there was a lot of other weirdness in this game. I think ultimately Gonzaga played worse in this game than they did the first time around against St. Mary's. But regardless, they certainly didn't play better. So that talking point hopefully still applies, as they did not beat Santa Clara last time out, and they did beat San Francisco last time out. So hopefully they can play better against both those teams, because they really need to. They really need to. Like we said, for San Francisco, that game will be on Saturday, net 60th right now, so that'll be a quad 1 opportunity for the Zags. This team beat San Diego and Pacific since the Gonzaga lost. They're playing Oregon State Wednesday at the Gill Coliseum. I'm going to be at that game. That's an important game for Oregon State. If they're able to win that game, that could jump them back to quad 2, quad 1 for Gonzaga's loss and win against them, which would be nice. But it could also hurt San Francisco. I don't think San Francisco is going to fall 15 spots losing to Oregon State. So I don't think they're going to fall out of the quad 1 conversation for Gonzaga, fortunately, but something to keep an eye on. Let's take a look at some of the WCC scenarios. So if the Zags go 2-0, they would finish the WCC regular season 14-4. That would be in second place. Both San Francisco and Santa Clara would have at least 5 losses. Nobody else is going to jump into that picture. So if Gonzaga goes 2-0, they are second place in the WCC. They do get the double bye in the WCC tournament. No question, no tiebreakers, no other scenarios to discuss. You go 2-0, you're second place, done. If you go 1-1, then you finish 13-5 in the WCC. If you go 1-1 and you lose to Santa Clara and beat San Francisco, and San Francisco beats Pacific, Santa Clara beats Pacific in their last game, and San Francisco beats Oregon State, then you have a 3-way tie. That's fun. My understanding is head-to-head would come into a place, so I believe Santa Clara, I'm not even sure. I think they'd have to start looking at some other data points. We'll cross that bridge if we get there, but you would have 3 teams tied at 13-5 in the WCC. If Gonzaga were to beat Santa Clara, if Gonzaga were to lose to Santa Clara, beat San Francisco, and the other teams took care of business, that would be the result there. If they beat Santa Clara and lose to San Francisco, and San Francisco beats Oregon State, then you're tied with San Francisco. There is a scenario where you beat Santa Clara, Gonzaga beats Santa Clara, Gonzaga loses to San Francisco, but San Francisco also loses to Oregon State, where Gonzaga still ends up in second place. Kind of a weird situation, definitely something that could happen. If the Zags go 0-2 in these 2 games, they finish 12-6. At that point, still reasonable. It's still possible they would be second. I believe it's still possible, but it would take the planets perfectly aligning. More than likely, you're third or fourth. There is a real possibility, not a super likely possibility, but there is a possibility that Gonzaga finishes as low as 4th in the WCC this season. That is a shocking statement to be saying out loud in late February, but here we are. It has been that kind of roller coaster of a season for the Zags. NCAA tournament picture stuff, it's hard to know at this point. Some quick thoughts. I think if Gonzaga wins out, I think if they win both these games, they win the WCC tournament, they're probably still going to be in that 7, maybe even 6 seed conversation, maybe, but more likely in that 7 seed range. If they win both these games and then lose in the WCC tournament, ideally lose that championship game. If so, you win the next 3 games, lose the WCC championship, then I think you're maybe 7 seed, maybe 8 seed, somewhere in there. If you split the regular season games and lose in the WCC championship, I still think you make it. That would basically be 2-2. Split the regular season, win the first WCC playoff game or tournament game, lose the WCC championship. You're still in. I think you're a 10 seed, maybe an 11 seed, maybe a play-in 11 game at that point, but I think you're still in. And if you split and you win the WCC tournament, then you're an 8 or a 9 seed, somewhere in that mix. If you lose both games, these games and then turn around and win the WCC tournament, 9 seed, 10 seed, somewhere in there. Obviously, the worst case scenario, you lose both these games, you lose in the WCC tournament. The absolute worst case scenario, bar none, you lose both these games, you lose the first game in the WCC tournament. That is where you're on the bubble. That is where you're sweaty, real sweaty on Selection Sunday. Because I think it's absolutely possible. Not very likely that this happens, but I think if this situation were to happen, it's very possible that Gonzaga would not be included in the field of 68 for the NCAA tournament. I think any wins and you're in. Might be ugly, might be a play-in, but any wins and you're in. So even if you lose the 2 regular season games and then you win your first game in the WCC tournament, which at that point you wouldn't be a 2 seed, so it wouldn't even be a bye. Maybe you got to win 2 in the WCC tournament. We'll see. It depends on who you would lose to if you lost to Oregon State. I mean, I think you lose both the regular season games, you play Oregon State in the first round, you lose that game, you're probably out, or maybe play-in game. But you lose the regular season games, you beat Oregon State. Even if you lose the next game, you're probably still in, but it's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly. It's not going to be a fun seed. The best case scenario for Gonzaga at this point is a 6 seed, and it requires them to win every game, and it still requires some other things to go their way. From a net perspective, Gonzaga didn't drop after this. They're still 10th in the net, believe it or not. I think they're still 12th at KenPom. Like the metrics still love them even after this loss. But at the end of the day, you got two quad 1 opportunities in front of you. You got to take care of them. There's just you got to take care of them. You got to win them. You got to win both these games, and then at least going into the WCC tournament. Maybe we're not confident they're in that championship game. Maybe we're definitely not confident they're winning that WCC championship, but we're feeling a lot more confident that, hey, whatever happens in Vegas, at least this team's still going to be going dancing, because that's where we're at. That's where we're at. We want to see this team in the NCAA tournament. We don't want to see them end a streak that's over 2 decades old. I think we're probably, it's gravy if the Sweet 16 streak stays alive. It's gravy. We'd be happy about that. But at the end of the day, I think we're just mostly wanting this team to get into the big dance at all, because that is far more in question in late February than it's been in pretty much a decade since that 2015-16 team that snuck in because of a win in the WCC tournament over St. Mary's. Well, folks, we'll be back on Tuesday getting you ready for Gonzaga's big-time matchup against Santa Clara on the road Tuesday night. We're going to get you ready for that game, what they've been up to lately, what Gonzaga needs to do to win that one. And then we'll get you ready for San Francisco later in the week, talk about some scenarios, what this team's up to, what they need to do to put themselves in a position heading into the WCC and eventually the NCAA Tournament. Going to wrap it up for me today, though, folks. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Thanks again, folks, and we will talk to you on Tuesday. Until then, as always, even after a tough loss, go Zags.